Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Two Blokes podcast. Today, we're discussing empathy and dehumanization and the behavior of people in the face of a tragic event, who it happened to, what people are saying about the victims, and what everyone is not talking about. So pull up a stump and join us. And Dead Duck, this was your idea. So why don't I go ahead and I'll just turn it over to you. Let's hear what you have to say.
Right. Okay. So obviously, we're all aware of what's been going on in the Atlantic Ocean with this submersible that went missing earlier on in the week. Now, five people have lost their lives, and quite a bit of the commentary that I have encountered, um, both directly and indirectly while browsing social media, has been about the fact that they were five rich white people, white men, in fact, and that basically they deserve to die because of that fact. Now, this kind of rhetoric just gets right up my nose because it's A, it's very, very stupid, and B, you are reducing somebody down to their private parts, their money, and their skin color, and that gets us absolutely nowhere. Now, unfortunately, it comes from people who claim to be. Most of it comes from people who are claiming to be compassionate and all this other and empathetic and everything else, and they're absolutely nowhere near it. They are so wide of the mark; it's absolutely unbelievable. And when I've had the discussions about this, it's been, I'm not being empathetic. They had loads of money. They could have solved this, that, and something else besides. And my counterpoint is and was that these people worked extremely hard for that money, and for you to begrudge them that reward for their sacrifices is absolutely beyond ridiculous. And we've seen dehumanization of men throughout history, and we continue to see it. And we've also been seeing quite a bit of dehumanization of women, dehumanization of trans people, and everybody else in between. And where does dehumanization actually get us? Well, where it gets us essentially is piles and piles of bodies. It has happened throughout human history. We only have to go back, what, not even 100 years, 80 years, we have to go back. And we saw it in Germany during the 1930s and 40s. Piles and piles of bodies because somebody decided that somebody else wasn't worth being a human. And trying to get people to understand that is beyond me. I don't know why people just do not get it. And as I say, it really, really winds me up. I try to be empathetic as I can to people, and I try to look at also figures throughout history. I've just referred to Germany. Then Adolf Hitler was not born a monster; he became one, and one of the most monstrous people we've seen in modern history. And nobody should celebrate the things that he did. But if somebody had taken one moment, 1 second in his life to treat him like a human being, because there are stories of the things that he went through as a child and everything else. If one person had turned around and treated him like a human being, there's every possibility that he would not have gone on to do the things he did. Now, there are some people, Taz, you and I were discussing this earlier on, that are maybe wired that way, but with the right coaxing, handling, however you want to term it, do not go on to be monsters. They go on to be functional human beings in society, but they're also the kinds of people that really shouldn't have intimate relationships and everything else because they can't function in them. So they just need to be left to their own devices in that sense. But dehumanizing people, having a lack of empathy for those that have suffered, is one of the great tragedies of human nature. I think that'd be the right way to term it. And for people to sit there and pretend that they have empathy or anything else when in fact they don't, they should be publicly shamed, and we don't do it because we're too afraid of what they may or may not say. I don't know what Tall Lady and Taz, what you think.
Well, I guess I'll push back a little bit on the idea of, how hard these people worked and how much they sacrificed in order to get where they are, because no human being is really capable uh, of a straight line, acquisition of that kind of wealth. That at least some good fortune, and really a lot of, I guess you would, I'm trying to be as general as possible to cover everybody, but disparities, things that are just set up incorrectly that allows for this to happen. But I'll also say that, I'm not going to put any more of the blame for that on those 5 people as I do on everybody else, because nobody can put together that kind of wealth without everybody cooperating at least a little bit, at least by their silence, right? But beyond that, that we've talked about this before, Dead Duck. There are rules, right? There are iron and immutable conditions under which everyone has always lived, that are they are not socially constructed, and they are not subject to at least very immediate change. And one of them is that dehumanizing any really even any individual on a smaller scale, but dehumanizing any group of people always ends in blood and regret and shame and like iron-willed resolution to never let it happen again. But it seems always to do so. I mean, and if any part of this is being engineered or at least encouraged, I would say it's that part of it, because it falls back to that old expression that people who are ignorant of history are condemned to repeat it.
Yeah.
Inescapable. Any one individual person can be smart enough and clever enough and self-aware enough, to avoid doing something that stupid, right? But groups of people, let's face it, when you get up above 3, 4, 5, 6 people, all of a sudden the room gets really stupid. I mean, I wish that wasn't true, but it is. And again, that's another pretty unchangeable thing about human life. And the best and most sustainable examples of avoiding that are people whose basically they're groups of people whose primary self-directive is to avoid being stupid, avoid being avoid ignoring history, avoid repeating it, avoid dehumanizing, and like things not to do, right? But there aren't very, the thing is, there aren't very many examples of that. There are some, but just not very many. And they tend to be small enough groups of people, and they tend to be unattractive enough to the larger groups of people, that eventually they fizzle out just for lack of support and lack of I guess ability to leave them alone. But like I said, given all that, like just the fact that we're stuck with groups of people are dumb, panicky, and paranoid, that we have to wait till the tragedy occurs, we have to observe the behavior, and we have to call it out. And we have to say, this is reprehensible and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
I mean, on one hand, for the people who have a moral compass, we say this is repugnant and dastardly, or whatever else you want to call it, like ugly. For the people without a moral compass, you present them with the simple reality that it never works and it
Yeah.
never will. It is ineffective. And it always ends up, like I said, in regret and shame and fear and a resolution to make sure that it never happens again. But it always does, because groups of people can be made to forget. Right? And the way they're made to forget is by minimizing their the appeal to their morality and their decency, and maximizing the appeal to their sense of insecurity. And every darkest part of human history that we can look back at, that's how it was done.
Yeah.
People's sense of common humanity and decency and the wisdom of humanizing each other was squashed down and just not talked about, and people's sense of insecurity and what they might lose if they don't do anything was shouted from the rooftops.
Yep.
It's not that complicated, and it works every time.
Yeah.
It's the one thing about all this that does work is that, but again, the end result is always the same. It's declared a failure, and people kind of shrug and say, God, people are terrible. And, I hope we get better, blah, 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 blah. And 30, 40 years down the road, we're right back where we were. So, like I said, it's, I watched or as many of them as I could stomach of these TikToks and YouTube videos and, blog posts and social media posts as I could stomach, and I said, we're getting ready to do what we've always done, and as I've said so many times before, this might be the last time we ever do it, right? Because we might not come out of this one.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's me.
Tall lady?
As I currently lie in the capital of people who seem to have zero sympathy, also known as California. Okay, that sounds bad. If you're California and you're watching this, this is not targeted towards you. But it's come to a point where things are just so unbelievably biased and people are so unbelievably ignorant, if you will, that it's just honestly just so horrendous how things are turning. With the news of the summary and the way people reacted, and then there are people are pointing them out. So obviously there are people who know that what's going on, the dehumanization of people, of women and men, and different minority groups and non-minority groups and all of the above. But it's just one of those things where, as it seems like we've gotten more socialized as a society, but we've been advancing and socializing without adapting other factors, the more this has gone out of hand. And it's just really hard for people to seem to understand what has gone and happened to them because they've been doing this for so long. I mean, to be honest, we've been dehumanizing men for a very long time, and women too. So it's not like this is something new, but it's like the format in which they've dehumanized them in a way. In the past, it was just like about soldiers, and it was like the down and out, but it was still like there was some personal effect, if you will, still back then. Nowadays, it just seems like there's a personal effect whatsoever to anything. And then there are people like, oh, there is a personal effect there because there's all these movements around and stuff, and it's like, really? Because it seems like none of these movements really have been the more modern ones been trying to humanize them. I feel like Dr. King's movement did humanize it, but like there's not a humanizing personal effect going on in some of these things. I'm trying to find the best way to explain this. It's very hard. It's just amazing to me how people care so little about death these days. It seems like they're so untouched by it. We have rappers dropping dead every other day, and no one thinks anything of it. Like things have become so normalized that are terrible. And instead of taking that as something to be afraid of or alert, or maybe think, oh, we need to take this steering wheel and do a U-turn and U-turn in the middle of Times Square or whatever, turn this boat around. People just seem to keep on going. They're just like, oh, we're just whatever. We're not going to be alert. The government's not doing anything about this. Granted, it sort of profits them too to do this stuff, but that's another issue.
Yeah.
But it's just, I'm going to be honest. I don't know what else I can say. I'm astounded right now. I walked down the streets of LA one of these weekends, and I was like, wow, I have never seen people who have seriously cared less in my life, and it is depressing. The lack of care for a fellow human being.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's tall lady, what you were just talking about. Like I said, that it's terrifying on the one hand, and it's also, it's like all the bad things. It's frightening and depressing and despairing and frustrating and bewildering, but on the other hand, I, I very seldom pitch people on only, the value of human life, because as you all know, I'm probably more indifferent than I should be about losing my own. That all by itself, to say that I live hasn't been enough for me for a while now. It's that I live and what I do, and how I do it and why. But that takes people like the people you see walking down the street, that's trying to get them to go into places that they feel like they're not required to go. They feel and perceive and are encouraged to make sure that they never look at why life is important and life matters, because it's, for one thing, it's kind of scary. It's not as easy to answer that as most people think. I want to live because I am alive, and I know that feeling, and that that cloud, very well, because that's how I lived my life, right all the way up until the moment everything came apart, and I had decided that I don't want to be alive just because I'm alive, but afterward, and with a lot of work and a lot of help, and I guess, a lot of gallows humor, I decided, well, I do want to live. I really appreciate, the time I have left. I'm very grateful for it. But here's why, you know, it's like I can outline it. It's not that hard. I want to live long enough to see, a little more humanity and a little more compassion and a little more gentleness and a little more love, and a little less despair and shame and hatred, and fear, before I go, right? And for whatever reason, that's good enough for me, right? And it's like, if you tried to get me to explain exactly why that's so important to me, maybe I could outline it, but it would be hard. I do that one is a closed loop. I do because I do, but the point is I do,
Yeah.
and I have found that it helps me stay out of, that group think that I was talking about before. Because it doesn't matter what the group think is, I always kind of keep it at bay, right? I always kind of keep it at arm's length, with a sense that I understand it and that I'm familiar with it because I used to live it, but it's just that I don't want it anymore.
Yeah.
I the whole thing of, really wanting to just give up and go away. Some of the things, that I got back, I got them back because I wanted them, right? But the things that I left behind, they're left behind for good, and that's one of them.
Yeah.
I don't think I could go back to that if I tried, without a lot of help from Jack Daniels anyway.
Yeah.
So, tall lady, you're absolutely right. It's, I said, it's frightening and bewildering and discouraging. It just takes the wind out of the sails to watch it in people's faces, and to watch it, at the grocery store, and at work, and really everywhere. But it's all of that, and at the same time, like I said, a little encouraging when I remember that I know why they feel that way. And it wasn't, you could, on the surface of it, it's just, you point to them and say, you're just giving up, but it isn't what they are doing, it's what they're not doing. And I believe me, if there's any, generalized compassion that I have for people, it comes from just knowing why they're not doing it.
Yeah.
It's because it's terrifying. It's terrifying to think, if I don't, like, to say to oneself, if I don't become a lot more compassionate and a lot more forgiving and a lot more understanding and a lot more loving in general, then I'm going to be just as much to blame when everything burns up as anybody else is. And these 5 people that died at the bottom of the ocean are going to be no less guilty than I am. Same thing as always. I wish that wasn't true, but it is.
Yeah.
I can't fix it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we see sort of this dehumanizing stuff everywhere we look. I mean, just in the Discord, I was telling you earlier on, Taz, in our Discord earlier on, there was a post put in one of the channels about the Eastern Front during the Second World War and the German soldiers going into Russia completely unprepared for the Russian winter and what have you. And it said, snowflakes kill Nazis. Well, the rank and file of the German military during the Second World War were not necessarily Nazi Party members. And it's severely dehumanizing to them to suggest that they were Nazi Party members. I'm perfectly willing to concede that there was a contingent that were Nazis. But you also had, people like Franz Stigler, who saved the German bomber during an air raid in 1943, just before Christmas. You had the events of like the Christmas truce in 1914, where men stopped shooting each other and decided to go out into no man's land and kick a football and stop and talk and all this other stuff. We've seen it very, very recently with the whole rhetoric around Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. Saying all lives matter, it shouldn't be controversial. But for whatever reason, it is. And I don't understand that. I don't understand how saying everybody's life has intrinsic value, no matter what. And as people within the men's rights sphere, we try to point out men's intrinsic value that is far beyond what they can provide as essentially servants. And people don't understand it, that, the reason that suicide is such a big thing for men's rights activists is because every life lost is potential lost. It's another person that has been removed from the world that could have done something great. And we've lost that. And by, boiling men down to just being male and saying, therefore, they have no value in this world, that's one of the ultimate forms of dehumanization. And it's something that needs to be brought to an end.
Yeah. Though, to make a quick comment on the All Lives Matter thing, I think the issue with that wasn't people weren't acknowledging All Lives Matter. I mean, there was obviously a big focus with Black Lives Matter. Obviously, there's some things in that organization that are a little questionable. But I think the issue was the fact, I think the best example I could give was the fact, basically, I should stop with this going back and forth, man. I need to get better at talking on this podcast. But you have the conservative and the progressive, and unfortunately America is very, very political and very extreme with their politics, and the fact that it just seems like there's the extreme one side, the extreme second side. You can't really win. There's not much moderate here. I think the problem became that it wasn't that people weren't saying all lives matter, but the fact that it was being used by the other extreme. The best idea I can give is there was a guy who, just for the hell of it, decided to go to Arkansas. I forgot, it was some middle nowhere town like Arkansas or something like that, which is considered and it's a pretty white filled, to be honest, slightly racist town. And I sat there with the sign that says Black Lives Matter, and the issue in the video was the fact that one of the people in the truck that drove by him holding the sign spat at him and said, "All lives matter too," N-word. I will never say any racial slurs because those are those are really screwed. You should never say racial slurs. So I will try to not swear, but you know what I mean by that. And that became the issue with that, is there were people who were using that as a way, basically it's you can't say that and then just say a term that's dehumanizing to another person. But I think that's the controversy with that. Was there people that were saying that and then literally 2 seconds later dehumanizing everyone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But honestly, that whole lives matter thing is just a problem on its own. It's how about we just don't? How about we just, I don't know, find something else, because y'all are now just so attached to the name, the lives matter thing, that we just sort of stop paying attention to actually making lives matter and focused more on the name.
Right. Yeah, the other I don't know what you would call it, concern, I guess, is that because Black Lives Matter got, reduced down to the assumption that until the movement started, Black lives didn't matter, which is ridiculous on its face. But again, the rules still apply, and whatever action, whether it's wise or unwise, generates a reaction. And, it didn't really take very much brain power to respond to Black Lives Matter with right along with all the other lives, but again, the concern is that now that it's kind of losing its teeth, right, and losing its punch, because of all of the controversy and call and response and pushback and counter pushback it's losing potency. The problem is they're going to come up with something else, that's just as superficial, just as empty-headed, and just as manipulative as Black Lives Matter. And this is one of the things that tells me, that people with only their own interests at heart, are at the root of all this, right? The people that engineered the climate, and the social environment that generated BLM do not care about Black people, and they never did. Right? They care about power for themselves, and that's all they've ever cared about. Whatever they come up with next, right, is going to have all of the same earmarks, right? And it's going to have the same effect, right? It is designed deliberately to generate reaction, to generate a pushback, to cause and encourage conflict, right? And like I said, all of this is happening in the same environment, the same social order, in the same discourse, where I'm sorry, to this very moment, I don't hear anyone, well, not anyone, I don't hear nearly enough people talking nearly enough about the things that we're talking about here, the things that really matter, the things that are doable and sustainable, right? In other words, we can keep doing it indefinitely, right? And that are, the actual solution to whatever these problems are, whether they be, the systemic devaluation of people of color, Black people in particular, men in general, women in general, people off the binary in general. There is one solution and one solution only. There are no other avenues. There isn't a magic trick, especially when I speak with fairly radicalized people on the left or the right, their biggest delusion is not, believe it or not, it isn't their hatred of the other. It's that they've convinced themselves that they can pull off their utopia without any of the virtues that I pointed out. It's like, we don't need forgiveness. We don't need compassion. We don't need understanding. We don't need honor or loyalty, or regard. We don't need any of that stuff. All we need is, my manifesto. Buy my book for $49.95. And it's like, that's never going to work. As long as all we are is just people, that is doomed at the gate. It will never work. And I'm not speaking in moral terms when I say that. That is the most pragmatic position that I can take, is simply to say it'll never fly, Orville. It ain't going to work, and its failure will cost everybody.
So I mean, I saw something last night, I commented on something last night. It was a story about a guy who'd been cheated on by his wife, and she'd left to run off with her lover and everything else. And I made the comment that, because the guy whose story it was coming across angry, and you can understand in that situation an amount of anger, and I certainly can. I can certainly empathize with it. But I said, he needs to let go. He needs to let go of the anger that he feels, because at the end of the day, it's only going to poison him. It's not going to poison his ex. And the ex was trying to come crawling back. And I said, no, in no way, shape, or form do I think he should take her back. That'd be a stupid idea. But the other comment I made was, their children were also suffering because of the breakdown in the relationship with their mother. And I said he needs to help the children to start rebuilding a relationship with their mother, irrespective of what's happening between him and her. You know, the children will need their mother as much as their father till the day they die. And somebody commented on that one to say, well, he doesn't need to do anything. It's not going to do him any damage. He's clearly fine, and he doesn't need to help his kids do anything involving the relationship with the mother. I just sat there thinking, tell me you've never been through a relationship breakup without telling me you've never been through a severe relationship breakup. You know,
Yeah.
it has taken me, right, a good couple of months, also in the time that we've been doing these podcasts, right, to understand that me being angry at things that have happened in recent memory is not going to do me any good at all. And not trying to work with my ex for the sake of our two children, and not trying to encourage my two children to have a good relationship with their mother is going to do any good at all. Part of my job as a father is to encourage all these things and to teach my children that whilst I cannot forget what has happened and I can't fully forgive what has happened, the least I can do is try to show their mother that I'm over it, I'm not angry about it anymore, and that I want her and the children to, have a successful relationship. It's basically treating my ex-wife like what she is, a human being. Yeah, all right, she's made mistakes in her life of one form or another, but she's no less human for it. In fact, you could probably make the argument she's more human for having made mistakes.
Yeah, like I said, no matter how big or how small it is, the hard one, I guess, the tricky one is forgiveness. Often think that, and my therapist has talked to me about this, that, healing doesn't always require the kind of forgiveness that most people think of. And I think she's right. I mean,
yeah,
the people that, lack of a better term, did me the most wrong, I have still been forced to forgive them in this, certain very roundabout way, right?
mm.
For one thing, the forgiveness didn't happen until after they died, right? So they were out of reach anyway, But those that remain, and there are many, the have it like forgiving them in that, in order to be okay, right, is more a matter of, as I've said before, like a business write-off. It's like it's just a debt that I can't carry around anymore. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like I got to write this off because otherwise I'm going out of business. And it's just kind of the way it is, right? And the other thing about it is that if I were, like, for all of them, if I were in a position of, direct and complete authority over them, so, whereby I could do whatever I wanted to, at that point, I would have a decision to make, right? I would have to say to myself, my spirit, my soul, my psyche, whatever you want to call it, has already suffered damage that, it's like, it's not bleeding anymore, but there's a lot of scar tissue, and, it, like, taking revenge on these people, okay, does that, like, remove scar tissue, or does it add more?
Yeah, it's
And
more.
right, and it's like this is my soul we're talking about. It's not theirs, right? They're soul is what it is. I mean, you know, it's like tell people that, you know, the ones that were the hardest to forgive. I mean, even if there's no afterlife, they're damned. You know, they left this earth with that unaccounted for and unamended. You know, and so now they're out of reach. I mean, they're even if I wanted, you know, to help them deal with that, I can't. They dead, you know, and they're going to be dead for a long time. And the ones that are not, you know, they are not coming to me, you know, asking for my forgiveness. So at the end of the day, you know, whether I have some authority over them or not, what am I forgiving? You know, it's like I am forgiving something they don't know they did wrong. Again, you know, I have to ask myself, is that going to help me? You know, so you know, if the answer is no, you know, if the answer is no, it won't help me if they don't ever, you know, if they don't ever acknowledge their, you know, their wrongdoing, then again, I have to write it off. I have to say this is just a bum debt, and you know they ain't never going to pay, and I got to stay in business. So I got to write this off. This is, you know, at least in my view, you know, this is this is a debt to be, you know, to be acquitted by the creator, right? What, or you know, by the universe. I really don't care which, you know, but it originated from somewhere. The one thing I know for a fact is it wasn't me, you know. So I still have to be able to say, because I can't, you know, I can't have this with me anymore. I have to turn it over to something, so that it can be that something's problem. You know, I mean, I'm old now. When I was, you know, 25 years old, right? You know, I didn't even notice really, you know, that I was carrying this around, right? I just knew I wasn't happy. But now I'm old enough that I look at it and say, yeah, I'm not going to be able to work with that.
Yeah. But by, you know, by forgiving them, at least in your own mind, even if you can't communicate to them that you've forgiven them to a degree, it allows you to regain an amount of your own humanity, because the first people to dehumanize you is always you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, particularly if you're suffering from a great deal of trauma. And you know, that was the point I was trying to make on that particular post, was he's not forgiving her or forgetting what she's done or taking her back or anything else. It's taking the burden off his own mind and taking back a piece of his own humanity, because holding
It's
on
sort
to
of
it
like the saying, if you want to be treated correctly, you got to treat yourself. You have to treat others like how you would treat yourself. If you want humanity, you got to give yourself your humanity first.
Yeah, you have.
Yeah.
And it's and
well,
Taz, I'm gonna blow your tires up a little bit here.
All right.
Part of the conversations you and I have had, that is something you have helped me to see.
Thank you.
You know, and I have, you know, I've been angry at my ex for a very, very long time, and I haven't forgotten, and I haven't forgiven her for it, for the things that she did that were wrong. But I understand that in order for me to move on as a person and to regain and retain my own humanity, I have to let it go. Yeah. And it's a microcosm of the lessons that society needs to learn.
Right.
So, you know, I'm sorry, Taz. I know you're not getting any younger, but we need you to stick around a bit more.
I'm doing what I can. And,
Please.
you know, it's, oh, thank you. And thank you, Dead Duck. That's very kind. You know, it kind of brings up, again, a little more gallows humor, that has helped, believe it or not. But, you know, a couple of times I've talked to like my therapist, you know, about who I might have been, had these things not happened to me, you know, what kind of a fella I would be. I mean, at my age. And, like, what if I would have been, like an insufferable jerk, right? And this was just, uh, nature's way of making sure I finally turned out decent, but I mean, that's kind of hyperbole, and I don't think that's really true. But the point I'm making is, that, and as you said, uh, this recovers for me, well, humanity, uh, I don't know if it does it justice. The real definition is just humanness, you know,
Mm.
uh, with flaws and virtues, et cetera, et cetera. But maybe that's it. And it helped me recover it and put a value on it, make it mean something, at least to me, and to take enough responsibility for it to say, I did get it back. It was hard and it hurt. And,
Mm.
it took time and money, and effort, and it took a lot of help. So now, it's like trading a bad debt owed to me, for for a good one that I owe to myself and kind of everyone else,
Mm.
so it's changed. Like, I ended up not wanting to get my humanity back just to have it, but so that I could do something with it,
Mm.
and like maybe this is a guy thing. I don't know, a tall lady.
I feel like also just your generation as well, the humanity toxic thing, because you came from the same generation as my father, where you guys went through the Vietnam War, and
Yeah,
that was like the whole protest about not wanting to go and whether this was worth it, and basically humanizing those poor soldiers who were only like 18 years old who were going there. You guys were part of, the hippie movement. They were always saying, "Oh, those hippies." It wasn't, "Oh, those people." It was
yeah,
the
yeah.
hippies. Ill. How could they? They're out in fields, buck naked.
Oh, yeah, a lot of them were. Well, I think so. I mean, at least the usable parts of that time period, like made it possible. I think in a lot of ways it made it possible for somebody like me to talk the way I do right now. Maybe if those people hadn't done what they'd done, none of this would ever even occur to me. And I would just get as good, heal up as much as I could, and then Cheetos and cat videos. But it didn't turn out that way. It came back to me, um, with enough, I guess they say, with enough value, and enough uh, sense of urgency, that I started feeling responsible for it, and I started feeling um, uh, compelled to do something with it pretty much right away. As soon as I said, wow, I'm become like Pinocchio, I'm a real boy now. But I don't want to turn into a jackass, right? So what I got to do, and then it's like, what did other people do who turned out well? And I was okay, well, they did this and they did this and they did this, and people still remember them as good people. So I'm like, well, okay, I'll do that. And a little bit of just my own uh I guess ingenuity, and trying to use what the talents that I have. I came to this, but like just hearing what you said, Dead Duck, and I'm so grateful for it. Just hearing things like that, it makes it all worthwhile. I help somebody do something that they might not have been able to do, if I couldn't offer what I have to offer. And like I said, but transferring that, like bottling it, right, and mass producing it, I don't know. It's like I keep looking for ways to uh popularize and normalize and stabilize these ideas, forgiveness and compassion and empathy and humanizing, for the sake of the person doing it, every bit as much as the sake of the person receiving it. That the math on this is really not that complicated, and it's always, like I said, throughout history, proven itself again and again and again. But I think the thing that makes it different this time, is the scale of it. This failure of, again, moral framework, or however you want to, failure of virtue. It's happening everywhere all at once. There really aren't any pockets of, virtue and forthrightness and, valor, right? It's like we're all crapping out at the same time, and I'm like, I look at that and I'm like, that's probably bad, because all the other, moral and social, failures that happened in the past that everybody talks about so much, they were isolated, right? Or at least not universal. They didn't happen everywhere at once. In the Dark Ages, it happened in Europe. Other parts of the world were doing okay. The more recent moral and societal outright failures, in places where where things like communism or fascism took over, right? It happened in those places, and everybody that wasn't in those places stood up and said, screw that, we're not going to do that, and we're going to go shut that down. But now it's like, I except for maybe the aliens from outer space, I can't think of who's going to come along and shut it down, because like I said, it's happening kind of everywhere. So you say it puts a sense of urgency, and immediacy on rekindling that. I see little pockets of hope and encouragement of people, wanting an honest return to, honest humility and honest forgiveness and honest compassion and empathy. Mostly, it seems like their motivation is that they're terrified of what's going to happen if they don't. In other words, it's one of those things where, they're not just doing it to be good people, right? And they're not just doing it to look good. They're doing it because they know we're in trouble.
Can I go on a little history tangent slightly related to this?
Sure.
So dead duck me himself. But just when you brought up like forgiveness, you're talking about like people starting to notice change and just learning forgiveness, like the needs for that. I think a big thing that factors in to maybe the issue of people, well, us needing honestly like 40 different Tazes and 400, as many Tazes as we can get in the world, honestly, that teach like compassion, humility, and forgiveness, and things like that. And this is the history part. I think it's just slightly related to the way that punishment, consequences, and morals just has been taught throughout history. Because there's always been this thing when it comes to the history of punishment where it's always this idea that you need to punish them for their actions, but they never really thought through the part where it's like, okay, how do they learn from that? It was just, oh, automatic punish. So it's like we came out with like dungeons and people were kept away, and that made them insane. And we came out with different torture devices back in the Middle Ages, early Europe, and then we came to the U.S. When the U.S. started, they decided to make prisons because somehow Granted, I guess I should give the US some, I don't know, I guess some credit that they at least tried to think of reform-ish in this, and that their thought process was that, oh, the person comes from a really hard and bad environment, and so if we just singularize them and put them in a new one that's completely clean, they'll change. Obviously, as we've all seen, has not worked out that way. And on top of that, then prisons started getting too full, and then it was found that there was psychological effects. And the only reason they never really took away the prison system, well, they did for a while. By the way, the South did not like the idea of prisons at all until much later on. Like they would actually somehow magically burn down their own prisons, but you could never tell it was them. It's just, oh, there was a random attack. What a coincidence. But getting back to the main story here, they never came out with another system or any form of like conversation about how to really take care of forgiveness and humility and things like that. When it came to talking about crimes and things that happened, never in the discussion was humility or forgiveness brought up. It was just what is the law going to do as consequences? What is the punishment? And so we've had an entire history of that, of just punishments of different kinds, some extremely brutal. And then when it came to prison, the problem was is it became this experiment that at least at the time, obviously not so much anymore, but at the time was unbelievable. Well, sort of still actually. But when they started it, it was with that thought, and then they just sort of kept it around because it was very profitable to have a state prison. I mean, it was such a new thing at the times that prisons started being created in the early 1800s, which is when some of the first prisons were built. And so it became this thing where it was like a tourist attraction, and people would actually, if you can believe it, get like postcards with a picture of prisons on it. Um, which is like, but it was also just the fact that it was like they used to require work. Obviously, they don't do this anymore in some prisons. They might do it in a couple, but they used to require the inmates to work. Yeah, some of them still do it. And so that also gave them income, and they just got a lot of income from it. And then, more and more people, they didn't have room, but they didn't feel like upgrading because it was a lot to actually make all those changes to the building. And now we end up in the system where we are, where the issues become, as well as the years have gone by, the sentences have gotten even longer, and the punishments are even worse, and these prisons are overpacked, they're terrible. And we as a society never really sat down. Granted, that's changing with restorative and transformative justice. So that's what I mean, like the last couple of decades, if even that. Honestly, not even. That we've started bringing up needing to teach forgiveness and humility within our society system of punishment. But we've just forever been that way. And so because of that, people were just seem to be trained to not really forgive at all. They were sort of taught a fake humility, if you will. Anyways, that finishes my history rant.
No, everything you said is where all of this comes from. That you've heard me talk before about the difference between punishment and consequences. That a case can be made that sometimes it's better, to punish and sanction than to allow consequences, and we haven't created that kind of culture and social order. We've created a culture and social order that is exactly as you describe it, and has created a prison and criminal industrial complex in one form or another, pretty much around the world, where it's, it's an overall positive, at least for, the people in charge, to make sure that there is always a reason to punish, right? That it's perpetual, right? And that's because, there really is there's no profitability and there's no wealth to be garnered by being forgiving and restorative and, as you say, transformative, which is a whole lot bigger word than most people think. You know, when they talk about transformative justice, or they talk about transformative politics, you know, like 99% of the people using those phrases really don't know what they're getting themselves into. You know, you guys have heard me talk before about what it would take to transform, you know, the cohort of men and boys from where we are now to where we really ought to be. And like I say, we're talking Pentagon budget. You know, we're talking about you know, a social and collective will, the likes of which God has never seen before, right? And I don't think it's going to turn out that way, you know. But in the meantime, you know, the hope that I see, and I guess, you know, the courage that I have, you know, it comes from the idea that if you know, the building is gonna fall, guys, you know, the building we're in gonna fall. It's just gonna, you know, but there are things we can do for and with each other, you know, to cushion the landing well enough, right? And sufficiently so that those who are left, you know, will not only will we know what to do, right? But we'll be willing and eager to do it, you know, and it won't just be running in a blind panic away from a building that already fell. You know, it'll be that, okay, the building fell, we lost a lot, you know, and it really sucks and really regret that. But now at least we know what to do. You know, now at least we have a map, you know, we've got a set of directions. And you know, there will, I'm hoping there will be a common will, you know, to do what it takes to make sure we don't, you know, find ourselves in the same building again. Right. You know, maybe they'll end up deciding, you know, better just not to have a building. Right. You know, or make it a single story structure, whatever the case, you know. But I mean, like I say, we do this to ourselves, you know, the punitive and carceral culture, Katrina, that you were talking about, you know, it comes from a place where before it was that, you know, there was kind of nothing much, you know. There was this, you know, really like cobbled together social order, and you know, good fences make good neighbors, you know, and kind of a, you know, a villager version of trust but verify, because there wasn't very much in the, you know, they didn't have law and law enforcement back then the way we do now. So, you know, just saying they were all terrible, evil people for doing it, not necessarily, you know, because they had to do something. There was getting to be too many people in too many places, doing too many different things, you know, for everybody to be keeping an eye on everybody all the time. It wasn't working anymore. So they had to do something. So they came up with prison and, you know, armed law enforcement, and, you know, resources, and money. You know, everybody was willing to give up a few shekels to make sure their crazy neighbor, you know, didn't go running down the street swinging an axe at everybody. At least not very often, you know. But we went from that to this, right? Yeah, and this nobody's happy with, right? I think it's like I was hearing some probably overinflated statistics about the cost of you know, long-term incarceration compared with the cost of you know, an Ivy League higher education. And it's really disheartening to find out how much more it costs to keep somebody in prison than to, you know, put them through Columbia, right? You know, or over where you're at, you know, Oxford, Dead Duck. It costs breathtaking amounts of money, you know, and that's just after you know, investigation arrest, arraignment, conviction, and sentencing. By the way, we pick up the check for all that too, you know. And like I said, it's just too much, right? In practical terms, the morality aside, it's staggering, and when you factor in the opportunity cost for somebody who has already, quote, paid their debt to society, that they're restricted forever from being who they might have been, and again, it's the result of, this like bright idea that we came up with a long time ago to lock them up and throw away the key, right? And now it's like, again, my generation, and Dead Duck, your generation, and Tall Lady, your generation, we all get to pick up the check. We're paying for foolish ideas and poorly thought out programs and plans that were put in place, and institutionalized well before we were born. And it sucks. Going back to forgiveness and real, fairness and justice. Everything I just said is entirely unjust. It's unreasonable and unreasoning, but the people who are, quote, to blame, they're gone. They won't ever answer for any of this, right? At least not in this world. So, we have what we have. And again, the building is falling. We're in it. It's going to land. The best we can hope for, is to land carefully, and humbly enough so that at least some of us can get back up, dust each other off, give each other a grateful hug and say, I guess we better do a little better this time.
It's funny because I'm just seeing in real time what we've been talking about this evening. I'm getting alerts through from the Discord, and people are literally saying on there, well, they knew what they were getting into. They played stupid games and won stupid prizes, just referring to this Titanic submarine incident. And it's just like, these people do not get it. These were human beings. They they didn't ask to die. This wasn't some kind of suicide pact or anything else. This was a group of people who, whether or not they were misguided, have still died. And the fact that we're seeing it, this is in real time, just blows me away. It really does.
I know. If it if it makes you feel any better, here we go. I can make the case that it was, from a certain point of view, foolish and misadventurous, for these 5 people to go do this, whether or not it cost $250,000 or not. But even if I had unlimited means, being who I am, I don't know if I would have done that. Now, does that mean I've never done anything stupid to the point of being potentially lethal in my life? The answer to that is no. I have done those things. I've done things, I'm not going to talk about it. I haven't talked to very many people about it. I've done some stuff that if anybody, if you both knew that I had done them, you would be shocked, right? And if I had done them and died, then, the people who would have found out that I did them because I died would have been shocked, right? They would have said, man, how could you be so stupid? But I have
I don't
never.
know, Taz. I live with my father. I'm not sure anything can surprise me at this point in time.
Yeah, good point. Good point. But the reality is, that's one of the things that marks me as human. And that's one of the things that marked those 5 guys as human, The other part of it is that, just because of the scale and the cost of what they were doing was unique to, to their income bracket. That by itself doesn't take away, in my mind, doesn't take away any of their humanity. But like I said, I have had to pay for that knowledge. There was a time, maybe not all that long ago, when I would have felt the same way. They got what they deserved. Screw them. And like I said, going from that to where I am now, like I said, it helps me see a little bit of their perspective, why they would say play stupid games, get stupid prizes. Because from a certain perspective, probably was a stupid game, and would, well, it's like the chances of not winning a stupid prize are not good enough, at least for me. I think I never would have done it, even in the old days, even if I had unlimited means. But that's just that particular brand of stupid game. I played my own, and the people saying all this stuff, either A, they also have and just aren't talking about it, or B, they haven't lived long enough and lived enough to be able to say the same. Like I said, speaking from a place of callowness, inexperience and ignorance of experience. Like I said, the important thing to me is to get people not to take that seriously. This is the child, stomping into the living room in front of the parents, about to give them a lecture, on how things ought to be. Right? And that's what they do. That's what kids do. But
Yeah.
it must not be taken seriously, because if it is, then you'll start, you'll relinquish the experience that has brought you wisdom. You'll be letting go of it. And I'm like, I've got mines, I'm keeping it.
Yeah.
And if that means I've got to disregard, kids when they say kid things, well, so be it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, like, I enjoy the luxury of having people in my life, like the tall lady here. And, I could say this one over here, from my perspective, she became an adult 20 minutes ago, and she already, knows more about some things than maybe I ever will. Right. And that, not only that, but, she has a lot more wisdom than the clock would have, would ordinarily allow. Right.
Yeah.
The clock and the calendar. But that's just, tall lady, that was kind of just the hand you were dealt. You played it well, which is, that's admirable. But like I said, the other ones, the ones in the Discord right now, and the ones all over Twitter and TikTok and all of that, they weren't dealt that hand, right? I mean, they were, they were dealt a crappy hand, and they don't know how to play the game anyway.
Yeah.
They're all drawing to an inside straight.
Yeah. This thing of, you're playing silly games and what have you. We've got to remember our modern history from the very earliest days of the 20th century is littered with examples of people playing stupid games by the modern definition. The only difference is they won big. I mean, if I gave you the opportunity to climb into an experimental aircraft, I told you you're going to be dropped from a Second World War era nuclear bomber into the airstream, and all you've got to do is push this button, and then you will accelerate to a speed that is faster than any man has ever gone. Are you going to do it? No.
No. Yeah, I mean, it takes a special breed. It does. I mean, it takes a special breed of fool, to move the world forward.
Yeah.
Right? And more often than not, they pay a price for it,
Mm.
right? Whether it's the vagaries and indignity of coming home a hero, right? Or
Hmm.
like the gentleman that broke the sound barrier spent a lot of years in anonymity,
Mm.
right? It's like he did this thing, it was like classified,
Yeah, but
it's like nobody
not
could
not
know.
no, but not only that. If I told you, by the way, several people who have tried this before you have died, you definitely wouldn't do it.
Hmm,
You know,
right.
and then you fast forward 20 years, everyone's crossing. People are crossing the Atlantic at twice as fast as you ever went in that aircraft
Mhm.
in a lounge suit. You had
Yeah,
to do it in a G suit.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, if somebody had gone up to the Wright brothers and said, "Look, you are likely to die doing this. Don't do it." Well, I wouldn't have met the tall lady, for example, if they'd have listened.
Exactly.
You know.
Exactly. Like I say, a guy like Chuck Yeager, what had, by all accounts, he was pleased with his accomplishment, right? And he was pleased with his recognition, from within his bubble, I mean, his cohort and everything. But again, by all accounts, he did not want and didn't seek anything outside of that.
Mm.
And these five, as far as I know, these five people, had they not been imploded on, they'd have gone down there and they would have taken a tour of the Titanic and they would have come back. You and me would have never heard about them.
Hmm.
You know, like I say, that's maybe that's not such a bad thing. Just because, like I say, if I were to do something like that, I wouldn't want the world to know about it.
Mm.
But it's not, and that isn't anything special about me. That's just my attitude toward the world. If they could
Mm.
handle it better, I wouldn't care.
Yeah.
That's what that comes out to is, if people as a species could do a better job, like dealing with and absorbing the extraordinary, then it wouldn't matter,
Mm.
but they can't, right? But they just can't. And so, at least for me, um, I want them to, I hate this. Always sound so terrible when I say this, but I want them to leave me alone, you
Mm.
know? I mean, in large measure. And so far it's worked out pretty good, you
Yeah.
know? Um, but if they don't, right, for some reason, whether I do something really stupid or do something reasonably good, but like I say, if they don't leave me alone, and if they do like take some kind of notice, the best that I can hope for is, like I say, that they'll think well of me,
Mm.
and just kind of forget about me, all on their own, you
Mm.
know. Now that's, I tell people that and it's like, oh, that's so sad. I'm like, well, maybe, I wish we could do better than that. But as
Yeah.
long as we can't, then, maybe it's sad, but that's what I want.
Yeah. I mean, if those five people had come back, no problems at all, and everything else, the first we would have known about it would be 30 years down the line, where your option for a holiday is to go 2.5 miles down in the ocean in a
Mm.
submarine
Right,
in
right,
comfort.
right. Air
Yeah.
travel
See?
in the distant past,
Mm.
um, the transatlantic travel in the distant past. All of these things were something, people like that did first,
Yeah.
because that's how, that's just the way human life is set up. But I guess my point is, if things are bad enough, um, around wealth disparity and stuff like that, and power disparity, if it's bad enough now, that we shouldn't be doing it that way anymore, okay, I'm ready to go. So what do we do instead? And don't tell me, stateless social utopia, because we are still people, and we aren't going to, like readily evolve into termites on two legs. We have what we have, right? We're individuals that can be, like I said, loyal and loving, forgiving and valorous and courageous and honest and humble. But as groups of people, we fail at that reliably.
Yeah.
You can take it to the bank.
Yeah. I mean, these 5 people apparently were all billionaires or what have you, or millionaires. I hadn't heard of any of them.
Mm-mm. Me neither.
Mm-hmm. So
So,
they basically were like, and that's the thing is like when we view people with money, we do dehumanize them because they have so much money. But these are guys we never heard of. They were probably very humble and they just wanted normal lives.
yeah, and they took an opportunity, which I think the vast majority of people, because I mean, one of the things I said in the video is human beings have an interest in the macabre.
Mm.
And you would probably make the argument, I'm quite sure, that diving the Titanic is quite a macabre thing to do, knowing how many people were lost on that voyage.
Right.
And it's no different to going to the 9/11 museum. It's no different to going to one of these serial killer museums or anything like that. We have an interest in it because it's human. They're human stories. I don't know what the crew of a US fire truck is, but they've got a fire truck that attended 9/11 or was on site at the Twin Towers when one of them collapsed, and it's got fire damage and impact damage from falling rubble.
Yeah.
Why wasn't that just scrapped? Well, because there's the human. I don't know what a crew is, 5 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
5 people left the fire station in New York to go to the scene who either didn't return home or didn't return home with the vehicle. And so, it's the reason we have this interest in the macabre is because of the human stories behind it. When the tall one was over with me, I took her to 2 different cemeteries. One was for a collapse of what was known as a slag heap or a spoil heap, which fell onto a junior school. And one was a memorial garden for every mining disaster that's ever happened in Wales, including the one or the 2 actually in the village that it's in. Why are they interesting? Because it's tied to our humanity.
Right.
If you're any kind of person and you have any level of empathy at all, you can walk around somewhere like that in utter silence and just take it in, take in the magnitude of the story that's being told.
Right. It's I guess the connection being between being able to do that, right? And, taking that same desire for, the more ethereal things like connection, and community and oneness, into life with the living, right? If you, in other words, if you can't make that connection, with those that went before and went too soon, went tragically, then, again, I've lived this way. It's very hard to feel connected to, and in community with the people like living and breathing and, working and sleeping and pooping around me. Right. It's just, it's, this unhealthy and unnatural sense of isolation, and aloneness. But this is one of those things, saying that out loud, even to however many people ever end up listening to this, or saying it to myself, that's one thing, right? And it's a good thing, I hope, but it really is something else, to transfer, and just take a ball of that desire and that human impulse and just put it in somebody, and much less everybody, but at the end of the day, that's kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
To be able to say it, and have it like sink in past the skin, and become part of them, even if they start out not agreeing with it, which I certainly, again, I certainly understand, wanting to resist it, because I did, I regret that I did, for sure, but I had, it's like, I had, all I had was what I had to work with, which wasn't very much, so I did end up like that. Back in the old days, I probably wouldn't have felt what you're describing in a place like that very much, but I think I would now, and mostly because, I want and I cultivate, that kind of sensation, that kind of connection with the living. As these things are so, say, ethereal and hard to get a grip on, hard to really map out and describe, but there is, a correlate between, the ability to, be grateful for and forgive and understand, those that aren't with us anymore. There's a connection between that and, like I say, being, understanding and forgiving, and wanting to be connected to those that are here right now. It's one of those things, it eludes the philosophers and the politicians and the psychologists, it just escapes them. That's why they don't talk about it, and I don't blame them, because, if the professionals started talking that way, the first thing's going to happen is people are going to be like, well, prove it. This isn't the kind of thing you can prove, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't generate a paper trail.
I think I can prove it, but I can't prove it without you experiencing it. Have you ever?
See, that's what I mean. It's it's getting people past the reluctance to experience it.
Yeah. Have you ever seen a haka from New Zealand?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
If that doesn't move you in at some deeper level, I have questions.
Like I say, dead duck, there are people that it does not move, and of course our question is, what the hell is wrong with them?
Yeah.
What they have a couple of, fries missing from their Happy Meal, but where, the solution is, where did they go, and how to help them retrieve them. That's the thing. I mean, like that, that display, it's like it moves you, and it, affects you and and tall lady. But the thing is, like I said, I can tell somebody, this moves me and this means something, and it has an effect on me. It has an effect on, how I see other people, but the why of it, the map, so to speak, doesn't, at least for me, doesn't really exist. I can't say it's because of X, Y, and Z, and I have to stop and say, well, it's because I'm a person, it affects me, and it inspires me because I'm alive. It's not much of an answer, but that's the answer.
Yeah. Yeah. I see. It's a close relation to religion, isn't it? Spirituality.
Yeah.
And
It
I
doesn't
think
have to be.
uh,
I mean,
it's close,
we do
it's closely
consider it
related.
that way, but like, it doesn't have
Mm,
to be related.
Well,
yeah.
yeah, I think it's one of those things where um it's most often the same feeling as, the feelings experienced in religious community, or even religious ecstasy, or feeling of revelation, whatever. But you're right, it doesn't have to be. I mean,
Because
I could have,
spirituality really is a lot focused on like the idea of purpose. I think where religion comes into that is we have verses written like the Bible or the Torah or the Quran or even just in the verbal teachings of like Buddha about learning different lessons about, you were built with like purpose or you find a path in life. And
yeah,
so it's like this sort of like idea of trials and tribulations, but you can also just do that through like normal. I get it. Like I do understand people doing normal. I'm just saying it doesn't have to be that way. You just do it normally. It's just about recognizing it.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, the some of the most deeply religious people that I know and have known, they have an awareness that, um aside from the, uh social and personal improvement teachings, there is this feeling, there is this sort of indescribable experience. I've even guys like Jonathan Haidt have uh, tried to put it on paper, so to speak, and say it is this. Um, yeah, like Deadbeat or Dead Duck is saying here, one man performing this haka. There's something more to any of it than just, here's a good plan for, getting along with each other, and here's a good plan for behaving yourself, right? There's more to it than that. But for the people who are, more skeptical maybe than ever about things like that, like Dead Duck, like you said, without having some kind of experience with it, without it
Mm,
happening to you or you making it happen, some part of that's always going to be missing. It'll always
mm,
be an intellectual exercise, and like I've gone into places with those, where those people congregate and talk to each other, and the kind of mental and intellectual gymnastics that they go through in order to avoid that experience is mind-boggling. It really is, and uh, they're, like, it's all kinds of different people that do that. But it's the thing that they don't do that kind of, is common among them. And
mm,
that is the desire to have that experience and the desire to keep that experience. Even if they have it once, for whatever reason it didn't take, and they walked away from it, and now, they at least believe that they're happy in their aloneness, in their isolation and alienation, right? Because the the way to get over that alienation and that isolation involves doing something that kind of doesn't make any sense,
mm,
that kind of doesn't, uh it defies description. It can't be outlined, can't be measured. The experience, like, I always look forward to having these talks with you guys, for that very same reason, you know, but I don't, I don't try to measure it. I don't
mm,
try to say I got this much of, this buzz from, talking to you guys. I just know, I got it.
mm.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
not even quite sure what it is, except it makes me feel really good.
Just makes you feel a little bit more human.
Yeah, a little more, just folks.
Mm.
Without, it's like it's being just folks, without the, I guess, sense of well, hubris,
Mm.
arrogance that too often comes with it. Like say a common thread among people that, that don't look for this kind of human connection. They think they're better than everybody else.
Mm.
They just think they're brighter and more adept, and more clever. And I say, when things get bad, people like that, step in and say, "Follow me, and I will solve all your problems." And the next thing you know, everything is in ruins and it's a smoking crater, and you know, almost everybody's dead.
Mm.
So it's like, it really all looks so good on paper, right? And it really all looks so like a can't miss deal, and it misses every time.
Yeah.
I mean, it just does. And I was like, I say everybody is a little bit responsible for that,
Mm.
but everybody at least has the capacity, to overcome it, right?
Yeah.
And it's a matter of volition. What do you desire to do? Do you desire to always only be right and always only be the smartest person in the room, or do you want to be with the people that you're in the room with,
Mm.
you know? And it's a hard, don't get me wrong, man, that's a hard choice. I've been in some rooms with some people that I really didn't want to be with. but, but it wasn't because, it wasn't because I just wanted to outwit them all. I want to be with, for one thing, I want to be with people who want to be with me, and
Mm.
to whom I can be of some value, and by that, I get as much value just by being there with you.
Mm.
And like I said, because I've uh, curated this family that I have, most of whom I couldn't probably even get all in the same room together because it would be a
Mm.
bar fight. At the same time, you all are my family.
Mm.
And, whenever I'm with you, I feel better than when I'm not. And it sure as hell isn't because I think I'm any smarter, or that I have some magic answer the rest of you don't have, right? Because I don't,
Mm.
I don't. I mean, I figured out a couple of things out of sheer desperation, and like a mix of fear and desire for death,
Mm.
that failed to happen. So, like, I had to do something, you know.
Yeah.
But beyond that, no, I'm never going to see myself as anything more in any way than, anybody that,
Mm.
that wants to spend some time with me.
Yeah.
All, for me, all you are is my people. That's the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah. All we are is human,
Yeah.
and we've we've reached a point where we recognise that all we are is human.
Yeah. Like I say, the whole thing is about trying to figure out a way, say, I make a joke out of it to say to bottle and sell it,
Mm.
but to make it, my one of my other family members, reminds me that this is about attraction, not promotion. And that's
Mm.
true. I
Mm.
think I think if there was a way to, promote and commodify, literally sell, real uh self-generated desire to do good, somebody would get very rich off that. It really would, but it's impossible.
Yeah.
It's just one of the things that people can't do. A lot of things we can do, but that's just not one of them. Each of us have to want to. at least a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like I tell people for the, some people who are very utopian, that in order for you to get what you want, tomorrow morning, everybody on the planet has to wake up and, genuinely commit to being humble and forgiving, compassionate, understanding, forbearing, honest.
Yeah, Jeff Bezos ain't doing that no time soon.
No. So, it would be a very different world starting tomorrow morning. But it's just not likely, Anyway, I think that's all I've got on this. Thank you guys so much, for your input. And I guess maybe since you started us off, Dead Duck, if you wanna go first with final thoughts.
I guess my final thoughts would be utopian, but also genuine. Is that we need to stop dehumanizing one another, whether that's on a micro level, sort of one-on-one, or on a much larger scale, and recognizing that everybody is a human being at the end of the day, whether, no matter what you've got materialistically, what you look like, or whatever identifying characteristics you want to think of, everybody's a human being. And, whether it's 5 people in a, submarine, or the migrants, unfortunately, that died off the coast of Greece recently as well. Nobody deserves to die. And I'm not a big believer in things like the death penalty either. I think that's another way in which people are dehumanized. And it makes society no better than the criminal at the end of the day. But yeah, just stop this dehumanizing thing that we've got going on, and have enough empathy to understand everybody's got a story. Everybody has a reason for why they are the way they are. Even if they are the most reprehensible person in history, they weren't born that way. Something happened, and be human enough to understand that. Tall lady, would you like to go next?
Sure. Final thoughts. Well, since I ended last week quite negative, I'm gonna try and end this week as positive as possible. We are not completely hopeless. Basically, yeah. I'm trying to find a good way to put this positivity where my mindset is definitely not in the moment. It's just, I mean, the good part is people are starting to notice it. We mentioned some of these movies. I think some of them genuinely started trying to notice this, and of course, unfortunately, they switched different ways. But I think if we start speaking about humanity and start sort of figuring out what it is and trying to find humanity within ourselves and within each other, that things should improve greatly. And just also, I think it would help further on, because I think a lot of things that people feel like, oh my God, in the last couple of years, it's been one thing and another and another. And okay, yes, there was the pandemic. But another part of it is just there's always a need for change, and with change comes a very complicated conversation. And unfortunately, as we seem to keep going, complicated conversations, not something people want to have, but they got to be had. So if I had to leave a message for people to think on, think about how you're human and how you view other humans around you, and try to make your world a little bit more like a rainbow cupcake.
That's right.
A nice little colorful world where you admire and find great things and humanize all the little colors in your cupcake. And that's me out.
Brilliant. A rainbow cupcake. Now I'm hungry. All right. Thanks, guys. As I've said before, I really wish I could adequately express gratitude for you guys spending this time with me. I really appreciate it. It does things for me I just can't do on my own. So, you asked me to stick around. This kind of time is one of the reasons that I do. So thank you. And thank you everyone for listening. Everybody have a great week. Hopefully we'll be able to do this again next week. And until then, everybody take care and see you then.